All right, are we live? Can you guys, can they hear us? Can y'all, just type in the chat, give us some indication that you can hear us or anything like that. Anything. You guys can hear me, right?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, they can hear us. All right, so, hello, everybody. This is a little bit of a different stream tonight. We got, a couple other people here. So I'll let them introduce themselves first, and then we'll start, discussing decolonization and all of that, stuff involved with period 6. So, I'll give the mic to you guys. So Jillian.
All right, hi, I'm Jillian.
Hi, I'm Irfan.
All right, cool. So yeah, tonight's really just going to be more of a general discussion, sort of like podcast type of thing. So there's not really going to be much focus to it. Kind of, we're focusing on decolonization, but if you guys have any more questions about the exam preparation or any other content, we're happy to discuss it and talk about it. So let's just jump right into it. So the first question from Ashley, it says that I missed the last live stream. Can you do a quick summary of decolonization? So I'll just start this off. So like in period 6, in my opinion, I think that's really one of the bigger things that like, you have World War I and World War II. And then right after that, you start seeing the fall of imperialism. So like you have key concept 5.2 in period 5, and then you have key concept 6.2 with decolonization. So it's like, the type of thing. All right. Yeah.
Yeah, we're moving away from in past periods when we have a lot of empires. Think the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, and then we have in periods 4 and 5, Britain is a major dominating power throughout the world. And now as we're moving into the period after World War II, we're starting to see that more and more countries are becoming independent.
Yeah, it's pretty much what they said. More countries are becoming independent. There are more independence movements in Africa, India, the Middle East. Pretty much most smaller nations are trying to break away from the grasp of the Europeans and trying to form their own central government. And that's pretty much all they're doing.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the big thing with decolonization that you see. Like, if you look at a map in 1900, you'll see that the countries in Africa are like British Empire, Belgium, France, Germany. And then if you look at it in 1965 or something like that, you'll see 50, 60 countries just like scattered all over the place. And I think that really shows the effect that decolonization had on the world. But especially just like now when you think about with tying in like globalization and, the whole McDonaldization and interregional corporations, I think these new countries are very, I think they were very susceptible to like economic imperialism and like stuff like that, in the sense that another country could still kind of swoop in. They were a new kind of little baby country. So it's like they were still very vulnerable, and they're still very young. I mean, I think the youngest is like, 50 years, 40 years.
Mm-hmm. Which is crazy to think about because if you think about adults in your life too, that's about the span of some of their lifetimes. And that's how long that some of these countries in our world have existed. So they're very new and they're still figuring out their governments and their economy. And we're watching them grow into their own nations.
Yeah, definitely. And when you're looking at some of those new countries, you definitely see some of the consequences that came with branching away from European powers and becoming their own independent states. There's mostly consequences because they're pretty much getting started. They're still new to the world stage. They don't really know what they're doing much, but they have definitely progressed over time. But you can still see some of the consequences throughout.
Yeah, plus like what Jillian said with how some of our parents were probably alive when, Africa was still somewhat imperialized. You think about it, probably all of our parents were alive, when Germany was, they were probably taught in school that there was West and East Germany. And like there was, you kind of think about period 6 in that way. It's kind of a weird thing because it's like you have world history, but then you realize, there are people who are still alive today who experienced everything in this time period, And so I think especially with decolonization, like, it's kind of has a bunch of different, aspects to it, where you have the racial aspect with like things like apartheid. You have things like, political upheaval in India and things like war in Algeria. And I think the Cold War also had a big impact on it in the sense that like, you think about it and it's like the Cold War with the struggle for communism and capitalism. And then you have just in the middle of this clash, just all these countries breaking away. I can see the Soviet Union and United States trying to be like, ooh, let me get my grab here, grab here, grab here, stuff like that. So do you guys have like any other things to add to that question?
I think we covered it pretty well.
Yes, I mean, just like take away from like the whole thing, it's just 19, if you think about like after World War II up until like the end of the Cold War-ish, that's kind of when this whole thing happens. You see, colonies that in period 5 break away from their imperial power, and then they become more independent nations. And there still are some places that are still colonized. So you think about like the British Commonwealth in a way. You think Australia, Canada, places like those are still in a way kind of still British, the British Empire. And I mean, this wasn't the only time in history that there was decolonization. So you think about like the what are they called, revolutions, like the 1700s, 1800s. Those to an extent were anti-imperialist, stuff like that. So it's really a theme that you see throughout history of like imperialism, then breakaway, imperialism, then breakaway. So that's, we're kind of seeing in the final phase of world history this new phase of neo-imperialism that's forming.
And decolonization isn't a sudden thing. It's taking place over a long period of time. So we're seeing the seeds for decolonization start all the way back in after World War I, when we have Wilson's 14 points, and we start to see this idea of self-determination, where these countries and the people in them they have these nationalistic ideals, and they're thinking about splitting off from their imperial powers that they're a part of.
Yeah, it's pretty much like Jillian said. It's pretty much just people who want to create their own national government because they have their own sense of pride in their country. So they pretty much just want to break away from the European powers and create their own government, mostly nationalistic ideals, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think with this topic especially, it kind of ties in all of period 6. So like especially you think about, in period 6, you see like new globalization movements, things like the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, stuff like that. I think those really helped to found more countries in the sense that they were kind of very anti-imperialist and very for independence and for freedom for people. And so if there were people who didn't believe in their imperial power, it was kind of something that people believed that through the United Nations they had the right to, in a way, secede from their imperial power. See, I think we covered that one pretty well. So yeah, I think that's kind of just a quick summary of decolonization. It kind of goes over everything we're going to be talking about tonight. So it's kind of a good first question. And with the questions, we're going to be just running down these in order of the vote. So if you like go through here and vote for your favorite questions and stuff like that, we'll know which ones you guys want to go first and go last. So I'll start the next one. So in my class, our practice exam is coming up. Would you mind giving tips on how to make the most out of it for our own improvement, prepping for the real exam? So yeah, I know for me and Irfan, just heads up, me and Irfan have taken the exam, and I know Jillian, you're in AP World right now, so I don't know if you've taken any practice tests yet, or if you've done any sort of.
Definitely.
Okay, so
get started on your practice tests now. Whether you're taking them in class or taking them on your own, I would suggest taking even more on your own, even if you're already taking some in class. The more you prepare outside of class and you prepare yourself for the AP test, the better you're going to feel going into it. And you can help alleviate some of that test anxiety that most of us are already feeling.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the whole thing with like practice tests. It's like they're not just meant to show you, oh, okay, I'm only worth a 4, I'm only worth a 3. They're not meant to just like lock in your score in April, a month before the exam. They're meant for you to really see what you can grow on, what you can, improve on, because it's better to screw up now. And I keep telling this to anyone who asks me about practice tests, like it's better now to like get messy, make mistakes on the practice exam and see what works and what doesn't, rather than like on the real exam, be screwing up there. You don't want to lose points on the real exam. And so I would recommend, honestly, I took 2 practice tests, one in school and one at home. I'd recommend even maybe doing more than that, because if you can take a practice test and then study for a few weeks based off what you're bad at, that can really help you do well in the exam.
Yeah, that's pretty much exactly what I did. I mostly took practice exams at home, but even when I took those in school, I realized that, especially for me, I had trouble remembering information from like the second and third periods in world history. So I really just grew on that. So pretty much what you want to do is just grow on what you feel you need to study more, and just focus mostly on those, and those things that you feel like definitely, you could just put those to the side if you already know it. But you just want to grow on what you feel like you need to grow on. And that's pretty much what the practice exams will show you.
Yeah, and we're really lucky because we have so many resources available to us. All of you here, you have Fiveable at your fingertips. We have review books. You have the College Board where you can find prompts that will help you practice on your DBQs or your SAQs or your LEQs. And those are going to help you be prepared when you take the actual AP test.
Yeah, I think definitely practicing, not just like, you don't even have to sit down for an hour, 40 minutes and write out a full essay. If you could look at a prompt and then spend 15 minutes either reading the documents or spend 5-10 minutes, outlining what your essay would be on, that's still really good, because then you can at least know how you would get the points. So that, well, I mean, I'm not just saying don't write any essays. You should definitely write full essays. But if you don't have the time to write full essays a lot, or if you, are kind of crunched for time with other homework and stuff, spend 10-15 minutes, just go through an essay and write out an outline, or write down just facts about it, or write down what you can, so that you can at least get your brain kind of moving and getting into that test prep mode. So then, I feel like it's almost like a little state that you're put in for the month, where it's like from the beginning of April until your test, it's like your brain is keeping all of the world history just in one big block right there. And and then on May, what is it, 16th this year, it's just gonna explode, and then you get your 5. It's really, and I found that by the end of the year, for me, I don't know if you guys experienced this, either Jillian right now or Irfan at the end of last year, by the end of period 4, period 5, it kind of started becoming a history soup in my head. I had to work backwards when I was looking at things. So I would see 600 to 1450, I'd see all right, that's period 3. What's going on in period 3? I'd have to go kind of incrementally back. And so if you're experiencing that, I think that's a good thing, actually, because it really means that you're integrating the material together rather than having it be very chunked up in your head, because I think that's a really key part of the exam, that if you are looking at it just as a period 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 thing, it's not really as effective as if you look at it almost as a storyline.
Definitely. And we're all getting to that point where we're coming to the end of the content, and we're seeing how everything comes together and gets us to where we are now. So at the start of the course, you might have felt really overwhelmed. I know a lot of us still feel overwhelmed, but look at how far that you've made it. Most of us are in period 6 right now, and we're getting close to the exam, but you've learned about 10,000 years of history, and that's a real achievement.
Yeah, honestly, that's kind of amazing. But just a side note, I want to add, when you're getting ready to take the test, don't just feel stressed out. You want to make sure that you're free, especially the days leading up to the test. And I know Dylan, I told you all the time, the month before the test, dude, I don't know anything about old history at all. And then when I started taking the practice exams, I realized how much I actually knew, how much I had actually learned. And I started feeling more confident, and that's pretty much what the practice exam should do for you. But if you should still study closer to the first couple periods, because since those happened in the beginning of the year, you learned that in the beginning of the year, that kind of information might have gotten lost on you. So I feel that would be some of the most important things that you would want to study.
Yeah, I think definitely going into the exam with a healthy mindset is good. So if you walk into the exam thinking, I'm getting a 1, I'm getting a 1, I'm getting a 1, I'm getting a 1, you're going to be sitting rating your DBQ, second guessing yourself, thinking what I read is wrong, stuff like that. But for me, I walked into the exam and thought, all right, I did well on the practice test. I have done well with my studying. I have prepared for this. Whatever happens is going to happen. And I figured to myself, I know the material, and I kept telling myself that. And so when I did that, it really helped me sit down at the exam, and it almost felt like fun, because I was doing this, had music in the back of my head, just going through and filling in the bubbles. And so really, it's not fun, obviously. I was sitting there kind of bored out of my mind, but you sit there and you see something that and you're like, oh, I know that. I'm going to get that one right and stuff like that. It's exciting. It's definitely, and walking out of the exam room, I think Irfan, you can, empathize with this. You walk out of that exam room and you just you want to just cheer. It's amazing.
Yeah, honestly, when you walk out of that exam room, you've finally taken the test, you can just let go. You just want to jump around and say, yes, I did it. You're so excited and so happy. And it's just an amazing feeling, especially if you're confident in yourself and that you did good, you'll definitely feel amazing afterwards.
Yeah, and as Irfan was saying earlier, you know more than you think you know. So when you get to that test, have that mindset that you're going to tackle it and that you're going to go into that first multiple choice section and you're just going to lay down that knowledge that you've been learning all year.
Yeah, I mean, if you like think about the test almost like a game, it kind of helps you because it's like, instead of it just being like, oh, I've got this giant test, and if I don't do well in it, it's the end of my life. It's like, think of it almost just like picking up points in a game where it's just like, for each one you get right, you get another point. You can't lose points. And so it's like, if you keep telling yourself that, it kind of helps you, ease your nerves. And I think that plays a big role in how well you do on the exam. If you're stressing and freaking out, or if you're still kind of calm, cool, and collected. And I understand that you're all stressed, and that's okay. If anything, actually, I think being stressed is a good thing, right? At this point, because it means you care. If you're worried for the exam and you're thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do well in this? I can tell that, that you want to do well in this, and you clearly do care about your score. And so it's like, it's something that if you're nervous, it kind of means that you care and that you are going to do well, because you're going to spend time making sure that you're not nervous.
Yeah, and what Dylan said, it's good that you're nervous right now, because like it shows that you care, it shows that you really want to like get a good grade. But the days leading up to the test, especially the day of the test and the day before, you just want to like chill out a bit, make sure that you're relaxed for the test. So what I did personally, I just listened to music way before the test, even the night before, just to like boost my confidence up and then just keep me chilled out. Like I just wanted to be relaxed, ready for the test, and it kind of helped me like get a good night's sleep, because I knew that the night of the test I would have trouble sleeping the entire way through because I was so stressed out. But like doing what I wanted to do, listening to music, it kind of helps you out, just like chills you out a bit.
Yeah, I definitely think like those things the last couple of days of the exam are kind of crucial, in the sense that you don't want to cram all the material in. The last week, those first couple of days, you can still study and stuff like that. But I'd say like, the test is on the 16th this year, I think. Yeah. So then, the 16th, so like the 14th, 15th, 16th, those days, the 16th, obviously you'll take the test, but the 14th and 15th, I think that if you study and cram, you're just going to stress yourself out more, and, a time when you really don't want to stress yourself out. So I'd say like, especially the night before the exam, don't study. You can Google little things here and there if you want to know a fact, but don't think that you're going to cram in an entire time period or entire key concept in, 6 hours and then not go to sleep. It's definitely something that if you don't know it that night, you're not going to know it well enough to apply on the exam that next day. So I think we kind of for that. Irfan, do you have something else to say? Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
All right. Yeah, I think that kind of clears out that question. I know a lot of, you guys can ask us a lot of questions in terms of preparing for the exam, and we could talk about it for the entire hour, in the sense that there's just a lot to talk about with that. But, we'll move on to our next question. So from Megan, can you make sure to explain decolonization in the Middle East? All right, now we're getting into like the nitty gritty of what the stream is about. So I know, Irfan, you were doing research on like decolonization in the Middle East earlier today, so you can kind of open this one up and talk about it.
Yeah. So mostly what happened in Iran and Iraq. So starting off with Iran, pretty much what happened is the Shahs, so mostly the royalty of Iran, felt that it was necessary for them to gain Western influences, so they opened themselves up to foreign investment, and pretty much the entire government just favored Western influences and even just bigger what's it called?
Bigger power.
I was gonna mess up.
That's like bigger powers, do you mean?
Yeah, bigger powers. And Ayatollah Khomeini, who was the Shia leader at the time, felt that it was necessary to create a mostly Islamic government. So he pretty much just felt that it was necessary for the entire government to favor an Islamic view. So mostly, follow most Islamic rules. So women had to wear veils. And during this time, when Ayatollah Khomeini was in charge, he de-leveled the power of women. And when he was the leader of the revolution in Iran, he pretty much favored everything against thought of, and he pretty much just because he was the leader of the Shia Muslims, he gained more power over time until he was strong enough to like derail the power of the Shahs. That's pretty much it. And then through all this time, Iraq came in and felt that it would be necessary for them to gain power from the problems that were from the internal problems that were happening in Iran. And this definitely backfired on them, kind of.
Yeah, I think definitely after decolonization, the Middle East, especially with, you see, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, I think they're very very, like, what's the word? You know, when you're susceptible, there we go, to like economic imperialism, especially. And you see all the oil memes with the United States now, like, you know, you have, you know, they're so oil rich and so kind of economically rich in general. They kind of have that geographic luck there that, you know, you have these new countries forming, but then we also see then other countries trying to swoop in and recolonize, them. And so you see like the Soviet Union in 1959, they invade Afghanistan. I'm not sure on that year, you know, take that with a grain of salt. And then you also see like struggles over areas in like Mesopotamia and like in around the Red Sea and around the Mediterranean. So like I think the Sykes-Picot Agreement between like Britain and France, the whole Zionist movement is really a big thing happening in this time period, especially with the whole Israel and Palestine thing. And the really cool thing, not cool, but the kind of interesting thing is that this is still happening today. So really, you know, we don't know, there's no textbook that's going to tell us what's going to happen between not Italy, Israel and Palestine, because it hasn't happened yet. And so it's really an ongoing thing that we still don't really see the effect of. And that's kind of something to take away from decolonization, in my opinion, that, you know, it's still happening. It's still kind of going on. It's still a moving process.
Yeah, like Dylan was saying, I think one of the things about this course that's really different from some of your other classes, in math, we see that for a lot of things, there's a finite end to things. But for history, we see things and they keep going and going. So these problems that you're seeing in period 6, we're still seeing them today, and they still have an impact.
Yeah, and I think definitely like with the Middle East in particular, we kind of see that it's still, you know, you see the Middle East is kind of still a hot zone today in terms of other countries' involvements, and with all the wars and all the conflict that's going on in the Middle East. I think that can be somewhat attributed also to decolonization, especially on the grounds of Islamic and in terms of like cultural means. So I mean, we've seen a lot of like a lot of religious fundamentalism grow in the Middle East and around the world in general. But I think that's a real big consequence of decolonization, that we've seen these kind of very strict religious rulers that really take a very literal interpretation of their religion. And so it can lead to very drastic effects and very violent effects at times, which I think has contributed to the issues that's happening in the Middle East. Especially, I know you were talking about Ayatollah Khomeini, and I forget it was Iran or Iraq, but it was I know you were saying that he like was very religious and very fundamentalist in his policies.
Yeah. Jenna asked if I could repeat what I said about Iraq. So pretty much Iraq, when they looked at the internal problems that happened in Iran, what they did was they felt it would be in their best interest to gain more power in Iran and hopefully take over the government themselves. But this kind of backfired on them, and they were pushed back to Iraq. And this pretty much led to bad relations between the two nations. And you can still see this today. There are many fights between the two nations, and pretty much it caused even more problems than it did solve them.
Yeah, I think that kind of covers decolonization in the Middle East. And it's kind of one of those hidden, like, when you think of decolonization, you always think of kind of Africa, because that's where you hear was imperialized. But then you see, like, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which by the 19th century was kind of the not so Ottoman anymore empire, but you know, you see this crumbling of an empire into decolonized area, and then you just kind of see Europe swoop in and say, all right, this is mine, this is French, this is British, this is, you know, and you see also new global movements in the UN kind of impact the decolonization movement. So especially, I think it was United Nations something 237, I think is the number, that kind of fixed up how the territories between, you know, Israel and Palestine were split up. And that really if you look at a map of Israel and Palestine right now, it kind of looks like a mess, and that's really because we haven't figured out what we're doing with it yet. And even now, we're seeing other countries decide what's happening to these countries due to the fact that we have such an internationally connected world that decolonization isn't just like you think back to 1776, it's just United States breaks off from Britain. Now it's like, you think back to another decolonization movement in like the late 1900s, you think of, you think of the whole world community getting into it. So that really goes to show how globalized our world is today. All right, so I think we kind of answered that question pretty fully. So I can start, going through the next questions. So I think there was one down here that was, there's one down here that's more upvoted, so I'll just read that one. All right. What's some contextualization for decolonization? I think really global conflicts, in my opinion. You guys might disagree and we can kind of discuss that, and that's kind of what this is for. But I think global conflict, things like World War I, World War II, and the Cold War really impacted decolonization, similar to how like other issues that happened earlier in history in general kind of led to colonial disruption. I think World War I and World War II really shook the world so hard that other people wanted their own independent nations. And also a lot of these countries were so economically hurt by the war that they couldn't afford to keep their colonies anymore, leading to even negotiated decolonization, such as in the case of India.
Yeah, I agree with Dylan. Global conflicts, in my opinion, would have been one of the best ways to contextualize what happened for decolonization, mostly because, like Dylan said, after World War I and World War II, smaller nations felt that they needed to become independent, and they wanted to, and this could be seen as growing nationalistic views. They wanted to create their own government, create their own nation, and pretty much just grow without the eyes of European nations such as the British, the French, other European superpowers, pretty much.
Definitely. And when we think back to imperialism, part of that was racial ideologies like social Darwinism. And after these world wars have happened, now there's kind of some evidence that disproves this theory that that Europeans are above the rest of the world and they're just as susceptible to violence as anyone else is. So we're losing justification for reasons why different countries have imperial roots and different colonies around the world.
Yeah, I think that, especially if you got an essay on decolonization, which, when I was making my predictions for what the essays would be this year, I figured that we'd have a decolonization DBQ. That's my kind of prediction. And we can also discuss, what you guys think the essays will be on this year. I think definitely if you see something on decolonization, open it up with World War I, World War II, and the Cold War, and then spend a couple, maybe a paragraph talking about that, and then move into decolonization, and that'll lead to a really, really successful contextualization point for the essay. And I think that's kind of one of the, both one of the easier and one of the harder points to earn, more for the sake that, like, if you don't know what's going on across the world, it's kind of hard to get. But if you know the big picture, you can really kind of have a lot of fun with that point, I think. All right, let's move on to the next question. I know it's kind of awkward in between questions because I'm waiting for everyone else to say something. So it's like, all right, let me see what's the most upvoted. Here we go. Do you necessarily need to know which period something occurs in? Like, are the questions grouped by the periods? Yes. Yeah, I'm going to say yeah for that question. More because you have to know what period things occurred in. You don't have to know specific years, but kind of know like a general order, a big picture order. And the questions do go in order of time period. So on, like, if you're taking an AP test, the multiple choice will start at period 1 and end at period 6. And it'll be roughly, I want to say 10 questions per time period. So,
yeah. All right, go ahead.
You can go first.
No, it's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, and what I've seen from my practice too is that when you're taking these and you're seeing these questions, sometimes you're going to get asked something that's going to ask you about an effect in the 19th century or the 20th century. So know kind of to your different centuries and where is that falling. So if you're going to know any dates, know kind of the general dates that are going to split apart your different periods so that you're not talking about something in period 3 that's actually in period 5.
Yeah, I'd say like if there are any like specific years that you have to memorize, is that like by the end of the year, and I'm sure this has kind of happened naturally, you should almost just have those years or the time periods memorized. So you should be able to just go 8,000 to 600, 600 to 600, 600 to 1450, 1450 to 1750, and so on and so forth without really thinking, and then have the key concepts in your head. So you don't really need to know, you don't need to know the year of every revolution, every uprising, every single little thing, but knowing the big years of turning points and of really huge things that happen are really important to know for the exam, so you can properly contextualize them, properly analyze them in the global context that they're happening in.
Yeah, and if you know what's happening in the individual time periods, then you'll see that on the multiple choice, it'll go in order based on period 1, period 2, period 3, and it'll just go on from there. And when you know what's going on in the individual time periods, you'll know what happens in those different years, and pretty much it'll just make the test easier, because then you can just group all the questions that have to do with one time period together, and that pretty much just makes it easier to answer any of the questions that you might be having difficulty on. And definitely knowing what happens in the period before and period after will definitely help you with the period that you're stuck on for that single question.
Yeah, definitely. I think like when you have the questions going in order of time period too, it kind of helps you through the exam, because rather than it being very staggered and very random, so you have to shift around your mindset a lot, it's a very natural progression. I remember taking the exam and moving through the questions, and it was so subtle, the changes through the time periods, that I got to like the first period 6 question, like, holy crap, we just moved through, 8,000 years and 40 questions, and like found myself kind of sitting there like, oh my God, I just got through that in like, in a half hour, and just kind of literally blasted through 10,000 years of history. So it really helps you on the exam, because it keeps you in the same mindset for a couple of questions in a row, and it's very smooth in terms of you're almost moving through world history in a bunch of questions, and it really helps you out with the with the exam. And I think it really helps your preparation if you have that anticipated. So I think that covers that question more, because like it's just the questions really are grouped by the periods, and that's to help you. So use that to your advantage. All right, let me see. There's one. All right. What would the consequences of decolonization include? All right, this is a really good question. I really like this question. So I'll open this up to everyone else. Whoever wants to start up this one, we can start at this one, because this one's definitely something to know for the exam.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start off. You could see that in nations that became independent their government, so you
See,
smartly in between leaders. Don't freeze.
No, you froze.
Okay.
You're good now. There.
Is it good?
Yeah, you're cool. You can keep going.
All right. Cool. So you could see that there are definitely problems in the government, especially in the beginning when they first became independent. You could see, especially in South Africa and pretty much most of the nations in Africa, you could see political problems. There were many fights and battles for who would gain more power in the government, and pretty much just derailed how their nation would be run in the beginning years, and pretty much affected how those governments would be run from then on.
Yeah, I think definitely you can see these in Africa, but also all around the world. You see these new, baby countries arising in the 50s and 60s, and they're very susceptible to the global conflicts that's going on. And so you see a lot of them become very politically unstable, very politically, you see, especially think about Vietnam, you have Ho Chi Minh rise, and then they immediately almost become communist in the Vietnam War. And so you see this development. I think Vietnam serves as a really good example that they become independent, and then within 20 years, they're split in two into North and South Vietnam. And then obviously the Vietnam War happens, and there's they become Vietnam again. But still, I think there is a bit of, rustling about with that. You even see that in Korea. Korea was Chinese territory and Japanese territory for the longest time. And then you finally see, in the 60s, they get their independence. And then within, like that, you have the Cold War happen. You have them split in North and South Korea, which they still are today. So I think political instability and stuff like that are very susceptible for new countries. And I think there are some positive effects. So we can also talk about that, a bit later.
Yeah, and as we alluded to earlier, these countries are young and they're still figuring out how to govern themselves and what the political and economic situation is going to be. And so they haven't had as much time to develop as all the other countries around them have. So they're more susceptible. And I think, Dylan, you gave a great example with Vietnam.
Yeah, I think so. Like, and I mean, there are some positive effects. So you see very, see a new global, almost new global order where you have now peoples coming together in terms of a global society. So you have like the International Monetary Fund I talked about, the United Nations. You had the League of Nations, but then that kind of fell apart. You see, there are tons of international movements that happen because of decolonization. Especially you see this today, like we have so many international connections between countries as opposed to previously where we have kind of no real, previously in period 4, we didn't, we had interregional connections, but we didn't have countries working together to form international law, or there was no real like maritime law and stuff like that. I think that's really impacted how neo-imperialism and how decolonization has impacted the world today. I think our phone's having some technical difficulties.
Yeah.
My Wi-Fi is horrible right now.
Okay, that's cool.
Can
We'll
you
let
still
you know.
hear
We'll kind of. Yeah, we can hear you. At least I can.
Okay,
So I don't know about. All right, if you have any, if either of you have anything else to add on to the like effects of imperialism and stuff like that, or not imperialism, the effects of decolonization. I think that's definitely something very important to know of. And so you really see kind of growth and widening disparities also among these countries. So you have, you think about countries like the United States and Canada and Great Britain and stuff like that. They're super rich. You look at their GDP per capita, and the average income in the United States is something around like $56,000, a little bit like that. And then if you look at something like a country in Africa or in Asia, it can be 5 times, 10 times as low. So you really see this kind of very widening disparity in kind of the wealth gap. So I know we talk about like the first world and third world. So those kind of come from the Cold War, but there definitely is a disparity between very rich countries and very poor countries.
Yeah, and that's pretty much a different problem that came with decolonization. Economic problems rose from it because originally these small nations had those large, rich, powerful nations such as Great Britain, Spain, France backing them. And then when they created their own nation, they no longer had that much money to help them out. And especially right now, when you see the population growing in those smaller nations, you could definitely see the economic problems growing out of this. And then pretty much just from this, you could see like health problems that arose, sanitation that was in the smaller nations. Sanitation is terrible, health is terrible, and that's pretty much just a whole new problem that came from decolonization in the smaller nations.
Irfan, you wrote like a research paper on stuff like this, didn't you?
Yeah, that's what my I think IWA is on. So.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So like I know you've probably done extensive research on how. I know you're focusing on overpopulation. I think you told me, but like on how these decolonization movements has really impacted countries, especially in Africa and in places that were previously highly imperialized. So as opposed to places that were kind of just had influence, you see these places that had huge amounts of foreign aid from their imperial power. You see them kind of now start to fall apart because they don't have as much economic growth as before. And that's not to say that they're not trying. It's just the fact that they kind of broke away and they didn't have that new economic, powerhouse to back them.
Yeah, and you can definitely see those problems still happening today, and especially in like smaller nations in Africa. You could definitely see health problems that keep rising, especially when population keeps growing in those smaller nations. You could definitely see problems that just keep rising. I think that.
Yeah, is there anything else that anyone wants to add about decolonization, or in terms of just period 6 in general, what the effects of like all of the turmoil that's happening in period 6? I think that's the only way you can describe it, just pure turmoil. So like, is there anything else you guys want to add about period 6 and the effects of all the stuff that's happened then?
I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then let's move on to the next question. Sure. I think they're at the top now. There it is. All right. What role do international organizations play in the decolonization process? Were they necessary for facilitating the process, or did they harm the process in any way? All right, this is a very kind of argumentative question, so I think we're going to get some really good discussion out of this one. So I'll kind of just throw it to whoever wants to, talk about this one first. You can kind of jump in. I'll start it off. So yeah, I think international corporations, international organizations. Okay, I think they played a pretty large part in the decolonization process, especially due to the fact that when people started breaking away, especially after 1945, when the UN was established, you see these countries start to break apart, and now you start to see, rather than just being between two countries, now it's between 197, and everyone's trying to say, all right, should this happen? Is this just? Is this allowed? Does this follow international law? And I think at times this helped decolonization. I think at times it hurt it. So you think about especially, places like the Cold War really proved harmful for the UN. You have a lot of things with Israel and Palestine that's still happening today. I think the last one was involving the capital of Israel being Jerusalem or not. But yeah, we're seeing the UN really play a large role in this, in my opinion. And you guys might disagree or agree, but I think that it's kind of hurt it in ways and it's kind of helped it in other ways. And so I think that's really something that you can take away from it, the positive and negative effects of globalization in period 6 due to decolonization. So I think that's something to mention.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dylan. I like how you brought up the problems that were happening in Jerusalem and Palestine, how the UN is trying to figure that out, and pretty much every other nation is trying to figure that out, because it's pretty much become a huge problem right now, and that pretty much just branched out from period 6 in a way because of decolonization. And I think that international organizations mostly hurt decolonization in a way, but you could argue that there were definitely some positives to international organizations coming in for decolonization.
Yeah, I think you could argue either side to this argument. I really like Dylan. I really liked your response on this. And I wouldn't say they were necessary, but they definitely had an effect, would be my response.
Yeah, definitely. I think that with this new international world, we really see that things aren't just one country anymore. You really see that when something happens in the world, every country has a voice on it. Every country now is talking to each other through these new international movements and through these new international organizations that really improve how countries communicate with each other in a new kind of super government in a way. All right, it seems like we kind of closed out that question. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can take it, definitely. And I think that in order to look at this question kind of objectively, it's definitely important to look at the positive and negative effects of globalization. And so I think that's really important to look at with period 6. All right, I'm going to find the next question now. All right, here we go. From Sarah, how does the Cold War affect the process of decolonization? So I know we've talked about this. So I'll kind of, again, throw this out and let either Jillian or Irfan pick up on this, and then we can keep going. I know my dogs are barking, so if I toggle my mic from time to time. Yeah.
Jillian, would you like to go first?
Oh, sure. So what we see with the Cold War affecting decolonization is that the two superpowers involved, really, the Soviet Union and then the United States, they're kind of fighting through other countries. So we see in Korea and Vietnam that we have the Soviets on one side and the United States on the other. So Vietnam would be a great example. Vietnam was once part of French Indochina before they're kind of achieving their independence. And so having the Soviet Union and the United States in there in conflict is really affecting their ability to decolonize successfully and without violence.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with you. Because of the Cold War, it made it harder for nations to pretty much just branch out, especially from the larger nations who had already picked sides in the Cold War. And I think that it just led to more violence between the nations that were trying to branch out and choose a different side in the Cold War, between the smaller nations and the larger nations, such as Britain, for example, or France, or Spain, pretty much.
Yeah, I think definitely with the Cold War, I think it helped decolonization, actually. I know you guys are talking about how it kind of hurt it. But with decolonization, I think it led to more countries breaking apart, which led to more countries, more decolonization in general. Especially you see in Africa, the Cold War really affecting them in the third world because they're not getting any sort of economic aid from either side, because by not being capitalists, they're seen as communists. By not being communists, they're seen as capitalists. And so it's really something that affects decolonized countries. But even like I think you see in the 50s and 60s, the turmoil of the Cold War, and I think just the sheer like tensions of the Cold War really pulling apart countries by across ideological lines, especially I think, because now we see a very, very like one versus one side where it's like you're either with the Soviet Union, you're either with NATO, or you're in the middle and no one's going to help you. And so it almost forced countries to pick a side for their own well-being. And I think Ashley mentioned, I think this might be possibly a reason why some modern countries are so small. I think also kind of power is becoming more localized, more centralized. That could be something. And that's something we could definitely discuss. But yeah, the Cold War, I think, helped decolonization, actually. So you guys can like rebut or like, you know.
So, I mean, you could definitely argue on both sides. So like Dylan said, it could have helped decolonization because it forced countries to pick sides. You could argue that it hurt decolonization, like me and Jillian said. It pretty much just depends on what your views really are. I personally think that it mostly hurt decolonization, whereas Dylan said that he thinks it mostly helped decolonization, which is definitely true. And it pretty much just depends on how your view is on the topic.
And the beauty of history is that we can have opposing views and that you can argue different sides. So maybe you think that decolonization was helped by the Cold War, or maybe you don't, and that's okay.
Yeah, I think that's really the point of this class, is to move less away from a very black and white view of history and a very like, yeah, I think if you guys ever took world history honors at your school or just a general world history course, it's very like, here's what happened, here's what happened, here's what happened. Whereas with world history, it's a lot more about, here's what happened. All right, what can we conclude? Here's what happened, what can we see changing and continuing, and how can we draw comparisons? And I think that's really the beauty of this course specifically, that it really helps to, bring together critical thinking and these historical thinking skills. And so that's why I'm kind of sad to see it go next year. Rip. Yeah, I think that's kind of really how the Cold War, and you could really argue this both ways, and that's really kind of what I know Jillian was mentioning. That's what's really great. And so yeah, there are a bunch of different viewpoints you could take on this. So I think that's kind of the whole thing with this question. All right, let me see. I'm trying to find like the most upvoted ones with kind of out of order. All right. Can you talk about Ho Chi Minh, Nehru, Nelson Mandela, and Gandhi's role in decolonization? All right, yeah, I know these four figures are kind of people that if there's any figures for decolonization you want to know, you should know about these four. I know Gandhi, I think we're all familiar with, right? India and his kind of very peaceful movements. And this really leads to a contrast between some imperial decolonization movements with like Algeria specifically, you have these huge wars happening. But then in Britain, you have things like the Amritsar massacre and stuff like that occurring. But generally, there was no war. It was just like, their tensions were high, but then it led to a negotiated, peaceful split. And so I think that's kind of Gandhi's role, and we can go further into the other people's role kind of in discussion and stuff like that.
Yeah, so branching off of Gandhi, you could see that Nelson Mandela pretty much just took exactly what Gandhi did in India and applied it to South Africa. So as you probably know, there was the apartheid during the time that Nelson Mandela was trying to gain independence in South Africa, and that's pretty much when white people and black people were segregated. There was a lot of racism, a lot of hatred towards black people during that time. And when Nelson Mandela was trying to gain independence and to end the apartheid, especially, that was one of his bigger messages. He mainly focused on having peaceful riots instead of from before, when there were many like fights between white people and black people on ending the apartheid. This kind of transitioned into peaceful protests, and he pretty much just took this straight out of Gandhi's textbook and applied it to his own vision and his own message.
Yeah, I think Gandhi is a really important figure in history because of the people he inspires. Yes, we have Nelson Mandela, and then in the United States, there's Martin Luther King, who a lot of you should be familiar with. And these figures are important. Again, like Dylan was talking about, we can see the contrast between places that decolonized with violence and those that decolonized without, like where Gandhi was in India, how we see the split with India as a whole from Great Britain, and we also see West and East Pakistan develop, and then of course East Pakistan becomes Bangladesh. But we see them avoid a civil war by splitting religiously. And for those of you who are familiar with Gandhi and Jinnah and the divide between Hindus and Muslims in India, but again, we're still seeing a more peaceful split and smoother decolonization than other places like Algeria, where the split's very violent.
Yeah, and I think like I know Nehru was also mentioned this question, and I think as like a close associate of Gandhi, it's important to talk about him. But I think something that's really important with him is that he supported Western style industrialization, and so you can really see how countries that are really new are still trying to become economically viable and economically and politically very active. And so we see through Nehru a lot of things occur in terms of how countries become more decolonized and become more independent in their own aspects. And you see a lot of things happening in terms of independence for India, and it's a really interesting subject. So if you're interested, I recommend like the movie Gandhi, and it was a really good movie. And then just in general, like it's a really interesting topic in history. And then we can talk about Ho Chi Minh a little bit too with Vietnam. So do you guys have anything to add on, Ho Chi Minh or Vietnam or anything like that?
Unfortunately, I'm not really much of an expert on Ho Chi Minh, so I'll leave it to you guys. So,
all right, I'll sign up.
You want to start? Yeah.
Ho Chi Minh was the leader of Vietnam for a while. So I know when you think about him, think about like the communist leader, and he was a Vietnamese communist revolutionary leader, and he was also the chairman and first secretary of the Workers' Party of Vietnam. So he really ran Vietnam through part of the Vietnam War, and he led the Vietnam independence movement, and he established the communist-ruled Democratic Republic of Vietnam in 1945, and kicked out the French. I think it's really important to look at the consequences in Vietnam. So you see this new communist state rise, and then you see the Vietnam War, and you see a lot of decolonization pulling apart countries. So you see obviously North Vietnam and South Vietnam occurs, and you see the Vietnam War really pull apart, not Germany, yeah, pulled apart Germany. It pulled apart Vietnam in terms of across ideological lines, and really led to more violent decolonization movement, in my opinion. You guys can disagree, agree. So I think that kind of.
Definitely think that Vietnam had one of those more violent decolonizations because, again, we have the Soviet Union and the United States who are kind of in there during the period with the Cold War, and you have these two opposing ideals of communism and capitalism that are kind of affecting decolonization and how smoothly it can occur. And so we see Ho Chi Minh and we see Vietnam kind of under this dictatorship we have it split through the North and the South. So a lot of division, and I guess you could say that some of this division helps with decolonization, Dylan, like you were talking earlier, but definitely a more violent decolonization.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So I think that kind of ends out this question. So I'll move on to the next one. And we're starting to kind of dwindle down. This one doesn't really focus on decolonization, but we can still obviously discuss it. Do we need to know specifics about the Chinese dynasties? I think you should know probably little things to an extent. You don't have to know every ruler, every person, but knowing the major accomplishments of each dynasty really helps, especially because China is a big thing. Mm-hmm. So maybe we'll talk about that some more.
Yeah, well, China has been around for so long. Kind of know the dynasties. And there's the Chinese Dynasty song if you're having trouble remembering the order. I know that that's really helped me this year. Additionally, I know a little bit about the differences between legalism, Confucianism, and Taoism, and how they're playing a role in the Chinese dynasties. I don't know, Dylan, what else would you add?
Yeah, I'd say knowing the philosophies and the major things that follow Chinese history is really important, because that's really important when looking at continuities and changes. I think also knowing, like, I know, Ashley, you mentioned that you always mix up the Tang and the Song dynasties. Kind of associating like a couple words with each dynasty really helps. It's like with the Qin, I always said legalism, strict laws, and I always kind of thought about the terracotta warriors. And you kind of do that with each, dynasty. So you have the Han, and know what you need to know about that, and you kind of group them together. Excuse me. So you see like you see the Qin and the Han in time period 2, and then you see the Sui Tang Song in period 3, Yuan, Ming, and Qing in period 3-4, and then you see the Republic and Mao Zedong in period 6. So by really chopping it up like that, it can help you understand the progression of Chinese history across a very broad time period. So with the Tang and the Song, like the Tang's the very expansionist one. They have a lot of imperialistic. They're the ones that if you look at a map of them, they have like a big like kind of little like thing coming out of their empire. But then you also see in the Song technological influences, and really looking at the decline of China is really something big in this course, that you see China being this super huge powerhouse. They're on the verge of the Industrial Revolution in like the 1200s, and then you don't see that in Britain until 500 years later. So I know that's really something to look at with Chinese history. And while you don't need to know specifics, I'd say know a couple specific pieces of evidence that relates to the key concepts. So like technological influences and trade and stuff like that. Also, yeah, we can drop our Instagrams and stuff at the end.
Yeah.
So I think that covers that question. Irfan, I know you kind of glitched out. Do you have anything else to say on like that part?
What was the question?
It was like, what specifics do we have to know about like Chinese dynasties?
Well, I think you should pretty much just know the basics. Pretty much just how they went about doing what they did. You should definitely know the names of the different dynasties. The Tang, the Song, the Ming, the different names. I know there were a lot of them, but you should definitely know the basics about what entirely their dynasty was about, the big accomplishments that they made, some of the problems that they faced during their time, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah, definitely don't try and shove the entire history of China into your brain, but like Dylan said earlier, try and associate a couple key words with each Chinese dynasty and focus back to the key concepts, because if you know those key concepts and you have a really good understanding of them, that's going to help you be successful on the test.
Yeah, I think with China especially, it's such a big thing, and especially in the earlier time periods, it plays a really big role in the facilitation of trade and in terms of just in general the entire world. And so looking at China throughout world history and how they relate to the rest of the world is definitely something important that you should look at. So you see like communist China rise and stuff like that. So I think that kind of finishes out the question. I know I dropped the Chinese Dynasty song, so quite a good song.
Very, yeah, everyone loves that if you haven't already.
It is the like theme song of AP World. It's a good song. But yeah, I think that kind of closes out this question, so we'll kind of move on. All right. There you go. There's a question. All right, from from Timmy Cusack. Are there any figures who should be memorized besides when looking at decolonization, besides the larger names such as Gandhi, Ho Chi Minh, Nehru, and Mandela? I can't think of many. I mean, if you guys know any other decolonization people, feel free to mention it. Those are the 4 that I know off the top of my head. I know there was another one. What was his name? I forget his name, so he clearly wasn't all that memorable. Yeah, I think those are the 4 big ones. And even they're never going to ask you on the exam, like, compare the political philosophies of these 2 random people. But like, they could definitely make good evidence points. And I know like on our, I've seen short answer questions on Gandhi before. Maybe looking at like Che Guevara and other Cuban movements. Looking at like Fidel Castro. If you guys have anything else to add on to that.
I definitely think that those are some of the most important figures to know. And like you said, Dylan, they can be used as evidence points too. If you're on an essay question, you can use that to earn points in your writing, and they're great examples you can use. So I think those are the key ones to know.
Yeah, I think those four are pretty much the most important. I don't remember seeing anything on the AP exam that has to do with any other people who led decolonization movements other than those four. And even then, I didn't really see Nehru or
Okay. I got one, yeah. Another guy to know with decolonization might be Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was an Indian.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, he just popped into my head. He formed the All India Muslim League, and so he really caused a lot of the split with India and Pakistan and West Pakistan, which eventually becomes it was either East or West Pakistan that became Bangladesh. But you see, you see that happen, and so I think he's really someone that you want to know, especially when analyzing Indian independence, because it's not just like a direct split. You also see a split within a split, where you see these mass migrations taking place to Pakistan and Bangladesh in the 70s, and so you really see a lot of. Thanks, Jenna. You see a lot of kind of turmoil happen there. So now you hear negotiated decolonization. Think, all right, no one died. No, there was still a lot of conflict and a lot of violence involved. I'm kind of going through some notes right now, trying to see if I see anyone else that's important to know. And I think, yeah, really, those are like the big four. So it's really, I think those are. Do you guys have anything else to add on people or other different things to know about decolonization?
I think that's pretty much it. Can't really think of any other people who led movements off the top of my head, because you don't really have to focus on any of the smaller ones other than those big four, and maybe you should look at Muhammad Ali Jinnah just to get a little more information about him, because I know he helped out Gandhi during the movement for independence, but then after they gained independence, Muhammad Ali Jinnah wanted to make a separate state for the Muslims and then a separate state for the Hindus, and they created West and East Pakistan for the Muslims. India became a country for the Hindus, and this led to many conflicts as Hindus and Muslims migrated to the different to Pakistan and India. And I know I did a little research and I saw I think it was 500,000 people died during those migrations because of the conflicts between the Muslims and the Hindus. And that pretty much just led to bad relations between the two nations. So definitely look at the top four and then Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
And remember, in India, the religious diversity that we're seeing, we see a predominantly Hindu country, and Jinnah was concerned about the Muslim minority, and that once Britain left as the imperial power, that the Muslim people, they would be treated really harshly if too many Hindu leaders came into power in India. And so that's why we're seeing too, they're trying to avoid a civil war in India as they're decolonizing.
Yeah, and I think definitely, I know, Maddie, you mentioned Nasser and Egypt. I think he would work, yeah. And then also another person just popped in my head, the decolonization of Ghana in 1957, led by Kwame Nkrumah. He's someone you might want to know, because it's really important to the Pan-Africanism movement, and it's really important to look at these new global movements happening that are very interregional. So you have Pan-Africanism, Pan-Arabism, and a lot of separatist movements like the Quebecois in Canada that really split. So there's really something to analyze. So I think that kind of covers out that question. We can move on. Yeah, okay. Let's just we can move on to the next question here. It's our first time doing this, so it's still kind of new to us. All right, there we go.
Figuring it out.
All right, I see a question from Angela. You see, how's everyone studying for the exam? So this is kind of a question that also everyone in the chat can talk about. And I know you guys have been talking about studying for the exam. For me, I just kind of did a generic practice test, study what you're bad at, another practice test, so on and so forth. But then I think doing a lot of practice essays and a lot of practice multiple choice really helps. So you guys, obviously, I know, Jillian, you're studying for the exam right now. Irfan, you can talk about what methods work for you, what didn't work for you.
So what I did was, after the practice exams, I looked at what I didn't do so good on, those different periods I felt like I didn't do so good on. And I also looked at the different contexts for the different periods. So I focused on industrial revolution, imperialism, and different just contexts for mainly the specific period. And then from then on, I just focused on mainly looking at different videos. So I've been on Fiveable since last year. I was using Fiveable to help me study for the world history exam, and it actually really helped because it really taught me a lot more than I actually knew before I actually signed on. And I think that mainly what you should do is look at videos that would help you with what you feel you don't know much about, and then just go on from there.
Yeah, I think that studying is a really individual process, and all of us have different ways to do it. And we see this question a lot on Fiveable of people asking, how should I study? What should I do to study? And that's really up to you. Don't try and study in a way that's not going to help you out. If you think that highlighting stuff isn't helpful for you, don't do that. Watch a video, take a practice exam, try and find different methods of studying that work best for you, and then utilize those to help you be successful. Because this studying process, it's not necessarily difficult because there's a lack of resources, but almost because there's too many available. So try and narrow down a couple that are really going to help you out. You have Fiveable, you have John Green in Crash Course, there's Patrick Lassiter's videos out there on YouTube, and AP Morgan teaching. There's review books you can get, like AP Achiever, Barron's, Princeton Review. That's the one I'm using. And we're all in this boat together. So definitely, if you have a way of studying that works for you, feel free to share that in the chat, and we can talk about different methods of studying, but find the methods that work best for you.
Yeah, I think definitely, like, I know every time I kind of go live, I always get a couple questions like, how do I study for the exam? How do I get a 5? And I keep telling them, like, I'll tell you what I did, but don't take what I did and say, all right, if I do that, I'm going to get a 5 1,000%, because for me, I'm someone who learns really well from lectures and from videos, but for you, you might learn really well from putting in some music and just reading through a textbook or annotating, or, I'm trying to think, because I always just watch videos. I don't really know any other studying methods. But yeah, I mean, just finding out what works for you will really help you, because, it's not, when you ask me how I study, or if you ask Irfan how he studies, or Jillian how she studies, that's because that's what works for her, and that's for her test. And so for your test, you're going to have to learn, how to study for yourself. And, you can experiment a little and employ different methods. I know for me, for the first, half of the year, I was just annotating my prep book, and I realized, this, after 70 on 70 on 70, I realized, this isn't working for me. So I finally realized, all right, we'll start actually figuring out how to study. And that really led to me being more successful in the course than if I had just asked someone who got a 4 or 5, what did you do? And then blindly following their advice,
Yeah, I think that studying really depends on how you feel you would do it best. So I know some people just write down outlines of different chapters. Some people just read their textbook the entire time. People watch videos, obviously. And for Ashley, if your teacher discouraged you from watching videos, I don't think that should stop you, because if that works for you, then you should definitely watch the video, because in the end, it's not going to be your teacher that's taking the test. It's going to be you that takes the test. So if the videos help you get in all that information, you should definitely just watch the videos. And you could definitely do other stuff to help you study, but I think if the videos do work for you, you should mainly focus on just watching videos.
Yeah, I definitely think doing what works for you. I know I'm going to drop this here. I know I put this together way back when my first stream happened, but this is kind of a review pack that I put together. So hopefully it helps some people. It kind of just includes a bunch of notes and outlines and tips for the exam. So I'll just drop that there in case that helps anyone. And really getting a global feel for how the world works, rather than knowing all the material, really can help you on the exam. Yeah, AP Worldopedia is a good one. I know I use that a little. It's incomplete, but I definitely know where it has info. It's really, really good. All right, I think that finishes off how to do this question. I know. I mean, we could talk about how to study for the exam all day. So it's definitely a very broad topic, and there's so many students doing so many different things. So just asking around is great, and just you asking shows that you really do care about the exam. So it's a good thing. All right, let me see. There you go. What were some of the social and economic consequences of decolonization? Right, I know we've been talking about this kind of all night. So yeah, I mean, there are positive and negative effects. It's really an argumentative question, so I'll kind of throw this out here. But I think, in my opinion, it kind of caused a lot of negative economic effects by decreasing foreign investment in countries, and kind of causing a lot of, I see in Zimbabwe especially, hyperinflation occurring due to really high prices, and really really low currency valuations and stuff like that. And so I really think that hurts their economy, especially domestically. And so I think that, you see decreased foreign investment really lead to economic hurt. And then you guys can talk about that and also the social, impacts, stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely widening economic gap. And especially if we're talking about these countries in Africa, when we saw the scramble for Africa and you have all these European countries in Africa, they're exploiting resources from there. And so now that there's no longer imperial powers there, we see that there's still resources, but people not necessarily knowing how to use them, or you still have countries that are trying to take advantage of that. And that's really hurting the economies in these different nations as they're trying to develop themselves.
Oh, very fun for us again.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I think what Jillian said, and especially with the social aspects, looking at it from both a racial and a cultural perspective, when you think about imperialism, you got to remember that they didn't keep in mind cultural boundaries. And so there were like tribes and different groups of people that were completely separated by borders because they were really more focused on, industrial production, stuff like that. So they didn't really care about where they put the borders in terms of cultural diversity. And so you see a lot of cultural aspects being affected by decolonization because you see new cultural and new nationalistic ideas form from these new ethnic groups that form. And I'm kind of hesitant to end this question just because I know Irfan's speaking.
All right.
There he is. Yeah, Irfan, do you have anything to add on that part? The social effects or cultural effects of decolonization?
Okay. So you could definitely see the economic effects of decolonization right now, especially in the what people call third world countries in Africa. You could definitely see that those nations really haven't developed as much as the larger, more wealthy nations, and that's because some of those big superpowers that were wealthy during their time don't really have the backing of those wealthy superpowers anymore. So they pretty much have to adapt themselves. They have to develop themselves, and that pretty much just caused problems for them economically because really they didn't have the funds or the money or the value of their currency to actually develop as much as the wealthier nations, and that just caused a whole lot more hosts of problems throughout their time of independence.
All right, does anyone have anything else? Because I think we kind of squared that away. I know economically you can analyze it as positive or negative because you could also talk about globalization and global capitalism impacting it. So I think it's a very nuanced issue. All right, let me try to find another question. So I think we're kind of dwindling down to our last couple here. I know if you guys still have questions, though, feel free to ask. All right, is choosing C a good alternative if you don't know the answer?
When in doubt, see your way out seems to be Jenna's strategy. But I think if you're on the multiple choice section, there's usually two answers that you can kind of toss out, and then you have two that you're choosing between, and they're both going to seem fairly correct, but you can really kind of tell between the two because one may not be specifically supported by what the question's asking. So even if you don't necessarily know the answer to it right away, don't just choose C because you're overwhelmed by the question. Try and narrow it down for a little bit. I'm not saying to spend a whole bunch of time on a question you don't know, but just try and limit some of your answer choices so that you'll be more likely to get it correct. So don't just choose C as a default.
Yeah, I kind of agree with everything that Jillian said. And I think that a lot of people have a tendency to let's say you have 5, 6 questions when you finish the exam or the multiple choice, and you have 5 or 6 that you kind of circled. Don't go through and go A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. I know I was talking to an AP World class the other day, and I told them this, but rather than fill it in with random letters, pick one letter that pick your favorite A, B, C, D, and then just fill down the line C, 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 or D, 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 or B, 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 B. And so you actually have a better chance of getting at least one of those right than if you were to just go A, B, A, C, A, whatever. I mean, obviously, the only time you shouldn't do that is if you've crossed out that letter. If you've crossed out C, don't think if you know the answer, you don't know the answer, you have to put down C, because don't do that. If you've crossed out C, don't put down C. So I think I think multiple choice is a really interesting thing because it's like it kind of tests how, not even just how well you know the information, but how well you can see through false, kind of, there are a lot of distractor answers. So they might say something that's correct, but not relevant to the source. Or like, I know that's a common one that I see where they'll say something that's correct factually, but it won't mention anything about that in the stimulus material that they give you. So that's something kind of important to pay attention to. It's definitely something that you want to take a look at. So I know it's kind of a different type of question. I know I've gotten that question a couple of times, so I know it's a very different type of question. All right, let's see. Down to our like final 5 or so here. All right. How does the UN actually work? Because the way my teacher talks about it, it seems like the US controls it a lot more than other nations. All right. I know Jillian or Irfan, if you want to open this up, if you guys know how the UN works in kind of some detail in terms of like how it operates and stuff like that. Or I can.
Don't want you go.
And so yeah, with the UN, it's kind of a global thing. And I know you mentioned that it's a global movement and a global organization that meets in New York a lot. And they kind of define international law. So you have things like, in the United States, you have laws that state, for example, I couldn't murder someone. I can't rob a bank. I can't, and other laws, and there are thousands of laws. But however, in another country, maybe driving on the left side of the street might be illegal, or speed limits might be different, or it might be illegal to do something else. I know in Canada it's legal to smoke marijuana. In the United States, federally, it's not. So that's an example of like domestic law. Whereas you also have this global law where it defines, the rules for a country and rules for a ruler, where it's like, that's why you see in the Nuremberg trials, you see things like crimes against humanity, crimes against there are 3 or 4 different like crimes, and so you really see these big war crimes, and that's what you go to if you're going to like the UN court to be prosecuted, you're probably a bad guy. You had to have done something like horrific, and so yeah, like, and when you say that the US has a lot more power, I think that it's debatable, but I know on the they're part of the like there's 5 countries that form a panel that runs the UN, and the United States is part of that. So I know you guys can talk about like the role of the United States in global politics and stuff like that also.
Yeah, well, I guess I would say for the second part of this question, it might seem like the U.S. controls a lot more than other nations to you, how your teacher talks about it, because I'm guessing that you're also here in America, so we have a tendency to talk about topics like this from our perspective and our view, so because we're more familiar with it. So it's the U.S. doesn't necessarily control more than other nations. It's just we're more familiar with what the U.S. is controlling, would be my response to this.
Yeah, it's pretty much like Jillian said. Most large nations definitely have more power in the actions of the UN, but it's not like the U.S. has more power than every other nation. It just focuses more on what nation you live in. So if you live in the US, you'll definitely look more at what the US policies are in the UN. If you live in Russia, you'll look at their policies, their actions. But pretty much most of the larger nations have an equal say in how the UN conducts their international business, how they, what actions they take, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I know, Ashley, you mentioned that does the panel of those 5 countries have a lot more power than the other countries? Maybe not in like deliberations and votes, but I know specifically, I'll look up the list of countries here, let me. I believe it is, I'm sorry, I'm like Googling this right now. There we go. It's the Big 5. They're called the Permanent 5, the Big 5, or the P5, which are China, France, Russia, the UK, and the United States. And then I believe there's 1 or 2 other states or other seats on the UN Security Council that kind of rotate. But they're the ones that if let's say I wanted to create my own country, right? I have my territory, and I say, all right, this is, AP Worldland, I don't know. And I go to the UN and say, I'm a new country. If either of those 5 countries say, no, you're not, there's no vote. It's just not a country. So there's no real deliberation there. So they have veto power. That's really led to a lot of things involving countries not becoming countries. So I know you see like Taiwan, they aren't becoming a full country because China keeps vetoing them and stuff like that. So if you guys have anything else to mention with that.
No, I think that's pretty much it on that topic.
I agree.
All right, so we can move on to the next question. All right, I know there's just a couple more here, so I'll kind of, there you go, there's one. All right, is the Enlightenment considered period 4 or period 5? This is kind of a debate, it's kind of in between. I'd say period 5, but that's more because the Enlightenment has more of an effect in period 5 than it does in period 4 with the revolutions and with new movements.
Yeah. I think I agree with Dylan on this one. We see kind of a little bit of Enlightenment thinking with the Renaissance in period 4 and some Enlightenment thinking there, but we really see the effects of the Enlightenment and how it's impacting people more in period 5. So I wouldn't try and constrict Enlightenment to either period 4 or period 5, but just kind of find a happy medium between the two of them.
Yeah, I agree with Jillian and Dylan. Dylan, oh my God. It's pretty much just in between the two periods. You can't really exactly say that it's in period 4 and period 5. In my opinion, I would definitely say period 5 because in period 4 you can definitely see the Enlightenment movement growing, like Jillian said, with the Renaissance. But you really see more of the overall impact of the Enlightenment in period 5. You see the effects that come of the Enlightenment, and it pretty much just reaches its peak in period 5. That's when everything pretty much just branches out and becomes like, it pretty much just gives all the effects of the Enlightenment through period 5 instead of period 4. But it definitely would be in between.
All right, yeah, I think it's in between, and also at the same time, you see the real effects happening in period 5 with the revolutions and with the new, Atlantic Revolution. So I think that's why I think in the curriculum it's under period 5, but they're never going to ask you. They never refer to periods on the test. So they're never going to ask you, what time period did this occur in, or because especially with things like the Enlightenment, you see that with like the Renaissance as well, or other things like there's no dates to decolonization, stuff like that, and so we really can see they're never going to ask you what years a process took place because it's very debatable. It's up to debate. All right, so let's move on to the next question. I know we're kind of, if you guys want to go in and upvote what you think is the best question, because right now they all have 0 votes, so I'm just kind of picking the ones that I think we could answer best. So I know from Kendra, she says, how do we organize the little like soup of history knowledge or the periodization? So I know, Jillian, I think you should probably open up with this one more because you're the one in the course right now, so you probably are experiencing this the most right now because it's all fresh in your head. So you can talk about how you organize it.
Sure. I'd say start with the key concepts. Go on the College Board, look at those key concepts. If you can kind of divide up history into those key concepts, the key concepts are like your roadmap to the AP test. So yeah, I definitely say I'm feeling a little bit of the historical soup right now, but start your review early. You can lay out a study plan if you haven't already. I know that we were talking about in prior sessions, getting on a study plan now that's going to help you be prepared for the AP test. Give yourself time though to review, and that's going to help give you enough time to start separating different historical events and people, and it's really going to help you separate, especially if you're going, I think most of us at this point are on different weeks, like taking periods 1 and 2 this week, and then period 3, 4, 5, 6, and the next couple weeks leading up to the AP test. So if you separate all the events that are happening in a certain period out by like a week, and you just review those events and you have that associated with that week, that's really going to help you divide it up so you're not as confused about different things happening all at once and you just have too much information in your head.
Right, yeah, I think that's really how you study for the exam, that you don't necessarily, with organizing the like history soup, it's definitely important to look at the key concepts since that's what you're going to be tested on. If there's something that's not in the curriculum, don't worry about it as much as something that is. So like you see the French Revolution is technically not in the curriculum, but the Age of Revolutions is. So the French Revolution is really more of an evidence point to know about. So it's really important to look at the curriculum closely and know what do I have to know, what don't I have to know, and stuff like that. I know, Irfan, did you have anything to kind of add about studying for the exam?
Sure. So pretty much you could kind of do how I did it. I mainly took the main points of a single period and focused on that for a day or 2 days, and then I went on to the next period. So in period one, I might have focused on the agricultural revolution, how and then period two, I would just go on to the next main point. So I would just divide each main point into that period and then focus on that one period for a day or 2 days or however long it takes you to get get accustomed to those main points of that period, and then you could move on from there.
Yeah, I agree. I know, Irfan, you reminded me that I know Irfan was in my class this year, so I know if there's anyone who also was in the same AP World class as us or is taking it this year at our school, our teacher had us make title pages for like each time period. I think that can really help, like just spend a night and write a page on the big picture stuff that happened during the time period. So like, for example, in my one for period 4, I talked about globalization, the Columbian exchange, new economic systems, the effects of globalization, the consolidation of power, those big things, as opposed to just the little, what happened in the Ottoman Empire in 1437 and how did this affect the world? Like looking at just the big picture can really help you studying for this exam. Yeah. All right, cool. I know we're kind of dwindling down to like the final couple now, really. All right. Which review books are the best? I know this is a really subjective question. I always I used Princeton Review.
I'm Princeton Review. Yeah, I've got it right here. Yeah. I'm biased, but Princeton Review.
But yeah, I know. I actually prefer, if you're like still looking for a review book to buy, I actually prefer AMSCO. I'd say go for that one. Because
yeah,
it really,
have that one too.
Because like if you look at this book, I'll try to find where I went through and just obliterated an entire time period, because it wasn't pretty. There it is. Yeah. So like you can see, like look at how much information they give you for these pages. So it's like, with AMSCO, it's a very concise, very good way to put it. So that's my opinion. I know, Irfan, did you use like any review books besides Princeton Review?
No, I didn't use review books. I didn't feel the need to buy them because I had all those videos and the different resources online. So I just felt that, because plus I mainly focus on videos because that's my way of studying. So because with reading, I'm not really good at like gaining all the information as opposed to watching a video or a lecture or something like that.
Right.
Yeah, and again, we see how different people study in different ways. So maybe if you haven't bought a review book already, if you're looking for one online, a lot of them have excerpts if you're looking on Amazon, or if you're going to like a bookstore where you can find all of these different review books, maybe thumb through one a little bit and see which one really appeals to you. Or maybe like Irfan, you don't really need a review book and you'd prefer to watch video lectures. Don't feel pressured into buying a review book necessarily if that's not going to help you be successful.
Yeah, I'd say like I didn't, after I realized that like what I did highlighting an entire time period didn't work for me because I think I bombed that test. I realized that really all I used this book for was the practice tests inside. So if you're going to buy a review book for anything, buy it for the practice test, because those practices are kind of hard to come by. I know there are released ones by the College Board, but most of them are unreleased and they're only given to teachers. So very few. I don't know if any students who really actually have them that I can disclose of, and so it's like it's kind of hard to find practice exams. So if you're going to buy a review book for anything, I say buy it for the practice tests. There are digital copies online though. I know if you are part of the AP World, AP Students Discord channel, there's a resources tab that you can find copies of review books, stuff like that. So I know there's other options than besides just buying it, because I know they are expensive. I know this book cost me $25. So like, they ain't cheap. And that's why you should buy 5 of them plus for the same price. a little plug there. All right, let's move on. All right, what is de-Stalinization really, and how exactly did Stalin rise to power after Lenin's death? All right, de-Stalinization I think was really when the recovery from his 5-year plans, and like, you see after Stalin, it really marks a turning point in the Cold War where you see these new, more liberal people join. You see people like Gorbachev and his real progressive movements to kind of free the Soviet Union from the propaganda that was happening, with his policies of glasnost and perestroika, and his opening to free market policies really helped Russia grow, except for the fact that it also actually brought to the demise of the USSR. And so really, I think that's what Destalinization is. I'm not sure. I'll have to look that up quickly. But yeah, you guys can also discuss that.
I can definitely talk about the second part with how Stalin rose to power after Lenin's death. Vladimir Lenin, he kind of has a quick death, which allows Stalin to step into power quickly. If Lenin had more time, Lenin didn't actually prefer Stalin as his successor, but because Lenin had such an unexpected death, it allows Stalin to step into a more vulnerable position. He just has more of an opportunity to step in because Vladimir Lenin's death was really unexpected.
Yeah, and Destalinization, just so you know, it's pretty much the movement away from the ideas that Stalin established during his rule. How after Stalin, it pretty much just moved his policies away and pretty much just changed the entire way that the entire way that the country was run, and it pretty much just took the opposite of what Stalin believed in and put that into their policies.
Yeah, definitely. I know there are a couple little things that you could talk about with Destalinization, things like the Khrushchev Thaw, which is where a lot of repression and censorship in the United Nations was relaxed, and millions of Soviet political prisoners were released from the gulags. However, you could also talk about how these were reverted during the Brezhnev era. And so it was really kind of a very back and forth thing until perestroika and glasnost really helped to bring free media and free market capitalism to the USSR and really help it to grow and then eventually fall in 1991. So, I mean, it's kind of a weird question. I know it's kind of something that I had to Google myself. So it's like, if it's not really something that I saw last year a lot, but just knowing about perestroika and glasnost is enough to know about Destalinization. So, yeah. All right. Who was Kaiser Wilhelm, and how and why did his assassination cause the genocide in Sarajevo and/or Bosnia? Wow, that's a very specific World War I related question. Now, Jillian, do you remember anything like this in your readings or from your book?
My class, we didn't have anything about this. We just had a test today on World War I, and we didn't see anything like this. And again, Dylan, like you were saying, this is a really specific question. And when you're doing AP World, it's good to know the specifics, but it's also really good to know the big picture. So I definitely don't say that right now I could give a really strong answer to this question. But you could definitely use, if you saw a question like this on the AP test and you didn't know the answer, you can use your knowledge of patterns in history to try and help you figure out the right answer. So I might let Dylan or Irfan maybe take this question if either of you two have more of an idea how to answer it.
Yeah, so I remember a little bit about this, but not enough to answer the question. I do know that he was assassinated and this did lead to the genocide, but like in the answer of how this happened, I'm not entirely sure, so I'll just leave it to Dylan.
I really don't know this question all that much too, because we didn't really go all that depth into World War I. I'm not sure about the assassination of Kaiser Wilhelm, but I know like with World War I, you see the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and this really leads to a lot of genocide in Sarajevo and Bosnia in terms of the Armenian genocide and the discrimination against Christians by Ottomans and by Turks. And I know that really leads to I know the Turks even today still they don't acknowledge the Armenian genocide as happening. So it's really something that focuses on key concept 6.2, and the Armenian genocide is definitely something to look into and to know for the exam. All right, I think that kind of knocks off all the questions. I know people were asking for our contact information, our social media and stuff. And so I'll drop mine in the chat, and then Irfan and Jillian, you guys can also, drop yours if you guys want.
Yeah.
So here,
I'm gone. Just gotta put my Snapchat.
Yeah, I'll put my Instagram. There you go. And then so the first one I'm gonna put is my Instagram, and then I'm gonna put my Snap. So you guys can feel free to add me, and if you guys have any questions, you can talk to me. I don't know about Jillian or Irfan if they are fine with people asking them questions. But for me, it's that you can ask me anything. So
I'm always happy to help. I'm currently in the content, so I'm not sure. Dylan and Irfan, they've already been through the whole course, but I'm definitely in the content right now. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of what's going on, and I'm definitely willing to help answer questions or give advice, look at any SAQs, LEQs, DVQs, and maybe give any advice if you want to send those to me. But don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't think that you're alone in this. You have us, you have Fiveable, you have all these resources available to you.
Right.
Yeah, and I'm
sorry, Irfan, you can say that. Say whatever you're gonna say.
Any before the test, I can definitely answer.
Yeah, I think that kind of clears out things for tonight. I know we don't have any questions left, so I'll give you guys another couple seconds to ask any last second questions you have or anything. But if not, I think we kind of finish this off. And I think this was a good stream. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, I'll wait until like the end of the minute, and then we can end this off. So just like a quick summary of what we talked about. We're talking about a lot about like decolonization and how the economic effects and social effects. Oh, there's a question. All right. What was the general reaction that would follow decolonization? It depends on the country. There was a lot of celebration in countries, especially in India and places like that, where people were happy to get their independence. However, of course, imperial powers were upset at this because they wanted their powers. So it's kind of a very varied. It depends on your point of view. If you're looking at this from a DDQ point of view, it's definitely worth looking at where this person is from, so that you could snatch up those sourcing points. I think that's definitely something to look into for a DDQ on decolonization. Oh, there we go. Questions are coming in. All right. Julian, do you have anything to say about like the reactions to decolonization, stuff like that?
I definitely say that following decolonization, and even as decolonization is happening, again, there's a surge in nationalism and nationalistic ideals. We're seeing these countries that are emerging, they're finding their identities.
Yeah, you guys pretty much crushed it. Nationalism grew. Bigger European powers that were pushed away from those smaller nations were by their loss of the land that they controlled, and pretty much just the decrease in power that they had over the entire world. I know that the British were really mad about this because they of the continent, and after decolonization, they were incredibly furious. In smaller nations, they are, but even in some of those small problems.
Oh, I just realized I've been muted this whole time.
Oh, right, good. I thought my sound wasn't working.
Sorry. All right, so let's start talking about like guerrilla warfare in Vietnam. So yeah, with Vietnam, it's a really kind of the only way I can think about describing it is savage. Like, you don't even just see this isn't just a war. You have people developing new guerrilla tactics where there are a bunch of memes going around now, especially like when you're walking in the Vietnamese forest and you feel someone like grab your ankle, stuff like that. Like people would hide and ambush there was napalming of entire forests because people were afraid of guerrilla warfare happening in these countries. And so that's really something that the Vietnam War is known for, how just sheerly brutal it was. So if you guys have anything else you want to talk about with the Vietnam War or with the brutality of it.
Yeah, I think brutality just summarizes summarizes it overall. Really. So I think you kind of hit the major points, Dylan.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Let's move on. All right. Are there many major events that happened between the 1990s and the 2010s that we should know for the AP World exam? The Rwandan genocide, I think, is a big one to know that happens in the 90s. 9/11. Yeah, that's kind of, I feel like when I talk to people, a lot of the time where the course ends for them is 9/11, because you're not going to see a specific question on a specific event from past 9/11. You could see stimulus sources from, like, I got one from 2010 once, and stuff like that. But you got to remember that this course started in 2002. And so, 2001 is kind of the ending point in terms of the effects and the big picture stuff. And so you're never going to see something talking about, analyze the Obama administration from these years. You're not going to see something like that, or you're not going to see, you could be asked maybe as an evidence point to talk about a modern thing, but I don't think that you wouldn't see something like that very big on the exam.
Yeah, I would add that because history, again, it's ongoing, that you're not going to really, like Dylan said, you're not going to necessarily see something from 2010, but some of the ideas might still be the same as we're talking about this. So I wouldn't say necessarily a specific question from that time period, but that year or set of years, I guess, but definitely know these continuing ideas about globalization and what's going on in period 6, because this is where the course is coming to an end.
Yeah, you really won't get any questions for about events that happen in between those time periods. I mean, you could definitely use some information, some modern examples to help out your answers, maybe on the short answer questions, DBQ or LEQ, but you won't really get like a question specifically up between those two periods in time, because there really wasn't anything like really big picture that would have happened. Of course, there was the genocide and 9/11, but that's pretty much it. Those you could use as examples or evidence.
Yeah, I think definitely, like you mentioned, that none of the stuff that's happened really in those time periods is big picture. I think the reason that you say that is because it hasn't been enough time for us to see the big picture. So, I was thinking about this before the course was slashed, but it's kind of interesting to think about what a period 7 might be like if in 2150, what are going to be the long run effects of what's happening today, and what are history students going to think about when they see, they're going to see things that happen today in their textbook, chapter 47, the Trump administration, something like that. So it's really interesting to think about in terms of how history kind of keeps moving, that it's only going to get bigger. It's only going to get harder. So I think that's kind of a good ending point, that kind of history keeps expanding. That's kind of something that you really take away from this course. So I think we're going to end it here unless we have another question. Nope, we're answering it. All right. So yeah, I think it's a good ending point. So, I'll let you guys make closing remarks as well. But yeah, thanks everyone. So I'll kind of turn over the mic to these guys to finish off.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this is for me and for Irfan too. This is kind of our first time on screen. So, and all of us being on here together. So thank you for being here with us as we kind of learn a bit about how to do this. And I know that I can say that I'm happy to be here. And so also a thank you to everyone who's spending their time here, and great job putting in the work to be prepared for the test. If you keep it up, you're going to do great.
Yeah. All right. Here,
yeah.
I
just want to say thanks really to everyone who stuck around for an hour and about 46 minutes, which is pretty crazy. Just wanted to say thank you guys, and thanks for Dylan for inviting me here. I think it was a great experience. Like, really had fun with it. It's pretty cool.
All right. Talk to you guys later.
All right.